Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UCS Defiant, watching the stars blur past as his ship jumped through hyperspace. 3 years had passed since humans joined the Galactic Council as a military member species. 3 years of fighting, alongside aliens who still didn't understand how humans worked. "Captain, we're coming up on the Terminus Gate," said Lieutenant Amy Carter from her station. She was young, maybe 25, with bright eyes and a smile that never seemed to fade. "The Vex fleet is right where intelligence said they'd be." Jake nodded and opened the ship's communication channel. "All hands, this is the captain. We've got another dance with the Vex coming up. Same as always, hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't let them think too much about what we're doing." Laughter echoed through the bridge. Sergeant Ben Rodriguez's voice came through the speakers from the Marine Bay. "You got it, Captain. My boys are ready to party. We've got the music all set up for when we board their ships." The alien observers on the bridge looked confused, as they always did. Commander Zexion, a tall, thin creature from the Kaleri species, had been assigned to watch human military operations. His large black eyes blinked slowly as he listened to the human chatter. "Captain Morrison," Zexion said in his careful, translated voice, "why do your people speak of music and parties before battle?" "This seems inappropriate," Amy laughed from her station. "Commander, you've been with us for 6 months now. Haven't you figured it out yet? We fight better when we're having fun." "This does not compute with standard military doctrine," Zexion replied. "Good thing we're not standard military," Jake said with a grin. "Amy, what's our tactical situation?" 15 Vex ships in a defensive formation around the gate. 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 4 support vessels. They're being predictable again. Same formation they used at the Centauri battle. The bridge erupted in voices as the crew began their pre-battle routine. It was chaos to alien eyes, but Jake knew his people. Ensign Pete Williams called out sensor readings while making jokes about Vex ship designs. Lieutenant Sarah Adams coordinated with engineering while humming an old Earth song. The communication officer, Danny Clark, was already patching in music from the ship's database. "Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, Amy announced. "All stations report ready." "Rodriguez, you and your Marines ready for some fun?" Jake asked. "Born ready, Captain. We've got Fortunate Son queued up for the boarding action." "Nothing says surprise like good old rock and roll." The Vorthic observer, a crystalline being named Resonance of Stars, made a sound like wind chimes. It was their species' way of showing confusion. Human tactical doctrine continues to baffle scientific understanding. Your success rate should not be possible with such ... disorder. Jake looked at the alien with amusement. "Disorder? This isn't disorder. This is how we work best." The ship dropped out of hyperspace, and immediately the bridge came alive with activity, but it wasn't the cold, efficient activity of other species' militaries. The humans were talking, joking, and coordinating all at the same time. "Contact! 15 Vex ships, just like Amy said," called out Pete Williams. "They're moving into attack formation. Danny, put us on all frequencies." "Let's say hello to our friends," Jake ordered. The communication officer grinned and opened channels to the entire fleet. Immediately, the airwaves filled with human voices. Ships reporting positions, Marines singing battle songs, and pilots making jokes about Vex tactics. "This is Captain Lisa Brooks on the UCS Guardian," came a familiar voice. "Ready to dance, Jake?" "Always ready, Lisa. Your people want to take the left flank?" "My Marines are already arguing about who gets to board the biggest ship first," Lisa replied with a laugh. Commander Zexion watched the display as human ships moved into position. To his eyes, it looked like chaos. Human vessels seemed to move randomly, their formations changing constantly. But somehow, they were surrounding the Vex fleet in a perfect tactical pattern. "I do not understand," he said to Jake. "Your ships appear to have no coordination, yet they move with perfect precision." "That's because you're listening to what?" "We're saying, not what we're doing," Amy said, not looking up from her tactical display. "We've been working together for years. We know what each other means." The first Vex ship opened fire, and the battle began in earnest. The bridge of the Defiant filled with noise as the crew coordinated their response, but it wasn't military jargon. It was pure, chaotic human communication. "Got 3 missiles coming in hot," Pete called out. "Danny, play something with a good beat. These things are moving like they're dancing." "How about some classical? I've got Wagner queued up," Danny replied. "Wagner? For missiles? Are you crazy?" Sarah laughed from the engineering station. "Play something with drums." The music started, and somehow the crew's coordination improved. The ship's weapons fired in rhythm with the beat, and the defensive systems moved like they were part of a dance. Zexion's reports would later describe this as impossible human intuition. But Jake knew better. His people weren't psychic. They were just human. They fought the way they lived, together, chaotically, but with a deep understanding of each other. "Rodriguez, you ready for your boarding party?" Jake asked as the Defiant closed on a Vex destroyer. "Music's ready, weapons are loaded, and my boys are singing," came the reply. "Let's show these Vex how humans party." The Marine assault ship launched from the Defiant's bay, and immediately the communication channels filled with Rodriguez's Marines singing an old Earth War song. Their voices were rough, off-key, and perfect. "Amy, how are we doing overall?" Jake asked. "Vex are confused," she reported with a grin. "Their tactical computer is having trouble predicting our movements. We're too random for their programming." "Random?" Jake laughed. "We're not random, we're human." The battle continued for another hour. Human ships danced around Vex vessels, their crews chattering constantly. Marines boarded enemy ships with music blasting and voices raised in song. Pilots made jokes about Vex flying skills while outmaneuvering ships twice their size. To the alien observers, it looked like chaos. But it was chaos that worked. When the last Vex ship surrendered, the human fleet regrouped. The communication channels were still full of voices, people comparing notes, sharing jokes, and already planning for the next battle. "Another successful engagement," Commander Zexion noted in his report. Human tactical doctrine remains incomprehensible, but effective. Resonance of stars made her wind chime sound again. Query: how do humans coordinate complex military operations through apparent chaos? Jake looked at both aliens and smiled. Simple, we trust each other. We've been doing this dance for 3 years now, and we know each other's steps. But your communication patterns show no recognizable structure, Zexion protested. That's because you're looking for the wrong kind of structure, Amy said. We're not robots, we're humans. We talk, we joke, we argue, and somehow it all works out. As the fleet prepared to return to base, Jake listened to the familiar sounds of his crew. They were already planning their next shore leave, arguing about music choices for the next battle, and making jokes about the Vex tactical computers. It was chaos. It was human. And it worked. Unknown to Jake or his crew, the Vex had been recording every communication, every joke, every song. Their Warmind AI was already analyzing human patterns, looking for weaknesses to exploit. The next battle would be different. The Vex were learning, but for now, the humans celebrated another victory in their own loud, chaotic way, never knowing that their greatest strength would soon become their greatest vulnerability. 2 weeks later, Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room of the Council military station, studying the holographic display of the Hadean sector. The intel looked straightforward, a Vex staging area that needed to be hit before they could launch. A major offensive. "The target is here," said Admiral Hayes, pointing to a red marker on the display. "Intelligence suggests this is where the Vex are building up for an assault on the outer colonies. We need to hit them hard and fast." Captain Lisa Brooks, Jake's longtime friend and commander of the UCS Guardian, nodded from across the table. "How many ships are we talking about?" "Estimates put it at around 20 vessels. Nothing we can't handle with our current task force." Jake looked at the tactical display. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "What kind of intelligence do we have on their defensive setup?" "Standard Vex patterns, they're predictable, as always." Amy Carter, who had been quiet during the briefing, finally spoke. Sir, has anyone considered that maybe they're being too predictable? After 3 years of fighting us, they should have learned something. Admiral Hayes waved her concern away. Lieutenant, the Vex are machines. They don't adapt the way organic species do. They follow their programming. But Jake trusted Amy's instincts. She had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed. Amy, what's bothering you about this? She pulled up her own tactical analysis. Look at their ship positions. Every battle for the past 6 months, they've been recording our communications. Every joke, every song, every random comment. Why would they do that if they're just following standard programming? Commander Zexion, who had been observing the briefing, made a clicking sound with his throat. The lieutenant raises a valid concern. The Vex have been unusually focused on human communication patterns. They're probably just trying to understand us, Admiral Hayes said. It doesn't change the mission. Jake wasn't convinced, but orders were orders. All right, we'll take the Defiant and Guardian, plus 4 support ships. Standard human tactics. Hit them loud and fast. 3 hours later, the small fleet jumped into the Hadian sector. Jake stood on his bridge, watching the stars resolve into points of light as they dropped out of hyperspace. Contact, Pete Williams called out from sensors. I'm reading ... Wait, this isn't right. What is it? Jake asked. 47 ships, sir, not 20. And they're not in defensive positions? They're surrounding us? The bridge went quiet for a moment. Then Danny Clark spoke up from communications. Captain, we're being hailed. It's not a surrender request. Put it on screen. The display filled with the image of a Vex Warmind AI, its mechanical voice cold and precise. Human vessels, you have entered a tactical demonstration zone. Prepare to witness the obsolescence of your chaotic communication methods. Well, that's not ominous at all, Lisa's voice came through the come from the Guardian. Jake, we're looking at a trap here. I can see that, Jake replied. All ships, battle stations, standard formation. The human fleet moved into position, and immediately the familiar chatter began. Marines preparing for boarding actions, pilots making jokes about Vex ship designs, and crew members coordinating with their usual mix of professionalism and casual banter. This is Sergeant Rodriguez. My Marines are ready to rock and roll. We've got some new music to try out on these tin cans. Engineering reports all systems green, Sarah Adams called out. Though I have to say, 47 ships is a bit much for a fair fight. Since when do we fight fair? Jake replied with a grin. Amy, what's our tactical situation? They're not moving like normal Vex ships, Amy reported, her voice worried. They're waiting for something. The first Vex ship opened fire, and something terrible happened. The missile didn't head for the Defiant's hull or engines. It followed Pete's voice as he called out sensor readings, tracking the communication signal like a bloodhound. What the hell? Pete shouted as the missile barely missed. The bridge. Danny, cut external comms. Jake ordered, but it was too late. Every human ship in the fleet was talking, and the Vex missiles were using their voices as targeting beacons. The Guardian took a direct hit as Lisa was coordinating with her tactical officer. The missile struck exactly where her voice transmission originated from the bridge communications array. Lisa, report, Jake called out. We're hit bad, came the reply, her voice tight with pain. They're using our voices to target us. Every word we speak is giving them a firing solution. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. The Vex hadn't just been recording human communications, they had been learning to weaponize. All ships, this is Morrison, he said into his cum. We need to... Another missile streaked past the bridge, following his voice like a hunting dog. Amy looked up from her tactical display, her face pale. Captain, they've turned our greatest strength into our greatest weakness. Every time we communicate, we're painting targets on ourselves. The battle was turning into a massacre. Human ships, used to coordinating through constant chatter, were being picked apart by weapons that used their own voices against them. The Vex Warmind AI had found the perfect counter to human tactics. Rodriguez, can you get your Marines too? The Guardian? Jake asked. Already launching, but, Captain, we can't coordinate the boarding without comms. How are we supposed to? His words were cut off as a Vex missile followed his transmission and struck the marine transport ship. The small vessel exploded in a ball of fire. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. 20 good Marines, gone because they spoke. Rodriguez's voice came through the comm, shaken and angry. Captain, half my boys are dead. What do we do? For the first time in 3 years of fighting, Jake Morrison didn't have an answer. The Vex had turned humanity's greatest asset into a liability. Every word his people spoke was potentially their last. The Guardian was taking heavy damage, listing badly as Lisa tried to keep her ship together. The other human vessels were faring no better, their crews struggling to coordinate without the constant communication that had made them so effective. Amy, Jake said quietly, how long can we keep this up? She looked at her tactical display, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by cold calculation. At this rate, maybe 10 minutes before we lose everything. Jake stared at the tactical display, watching his fleet die. The Vex had been smarter than anyone had given them credit for. They had studied human nature and found the perfect trap, but as he watched his people struggle in unnatural silence, something else began to stir in Jake's mind. A memory from his early military training, from exercises where communication was forbidden. Protocols that human forces had developed but never needed to use. Amy, he said slowly, remember the silent running drills from the academy? She looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. You mean the ones where we had to coordinate an entire fleet action without speaking? Those are the ones. But sir, we never actually used those protocols in real combat. They were just theoretical exercises. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He opened a channel to all human ships in the fleet. The Vex missiles immediately began tracking toward his voice, but he spoke anyway. All units, this is Morrison. Execute Protocol 77 Alpha. All units, go dark. The effect was immediate and absolute. Every human ship in the fleet cut external communications. The constant chatter, the jokes, the coordination calls. Everything stopped. The silence that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard from human forces. Commander Zexion, monitoring from his observation post, felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of the Vex, but fear of what the humans had just become. The Warmind AI, programmed to exploit human communication patterns, suddenly found itself facing an enemy that no longer fit its parameters. The humans had gone silent, and in that silence, something ancient and terrible began to awaken. The silence that followed Jake's order was complete and terrifying. On the bridge of the Defiant, the crew worked without speaking. Hand signals replaced verbal orders. The usual chaos of human coordination was gone, replaced by something cold and mechanical. Amy Carter stared at her tactical display, her cheerful demeanor replaced by focused intensity. She caught Jake's eye and held up 3 fingers, then pointed to the left. 3 enemy ships on the port side. Jake nodded and made a cutting motion across his throat. Understood. Target for destruction. Pete Williams at the sensor station had gone completely still. His usual running commentary about enemy movements was replaced by precise hand signals and data displays. He pointed to his screen, then held up his hands to show ship positions. The Vex fleet was moving, but their formation showed confusion. On the Guardian, Lisa Brooks was doing the same thing. Her damaged ship moved with new purpose, no longer trying to coordinate through voice communications. Instead, she was using her ship's position and weapons fire to send messages to the rest of the fleet. Commander Zexion watched the transformation with growing alarm. The humans he had observed for months were gone. In their place were beings that moved with machine-like precision. They coordinated their attacks through methods he couldn't understand. This is impossible, he whispered to himself. They show no communication signatures, yet they move as one mind. The Vex Warmind AI was having similar problems. Its entire strategy had been built around exploiting human communication patterns. Now it faced an enemy that made no sound, left no communication traces, and moved with mathematical precision. Jake looked at his crew and saw the change in their faces. Amy's bright smile was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Pete's constant chatter had been replaced by the focused intensity of a predator. Even Sarah in engineering had become something different, her usual jokes replaced by mechanical efficiency. The first coordinated attack came without warning. The human ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons firing in synchronized patterns. But there was no radio chatter, no battle cries, no music. Just the cold mathematics of destruction. The Vex ships, programmed to counter human chaos, found themselves facing something their creators had never imagined. The humans were fighting like machines, but machines guided by something the Vex couldn't understand. Rodriguez's remaining Marines prepared for boarding actions in complete silence. The sergeant, who had always led his men with jokes and music, now used hand signals and shared looks that spoke volumes. His Marines moved like shadows, their usual loud camaraderie replaced by deadly focus. "This is not right," resonance of stars. The Vorthak observer made her wind chime sound. Human neural patterns show coordination that exceeds biological limitations. How do they communicate without speaking? The answer was something no alien species had ever understood about humans. They didn't need to speak to communicate. Years of fighting together had created bonds that went beyond words. A look, a gesture, the way someone held their shoulders. All of it carried meaning. Jake watched his tactical display as the human fleet began to systematically destroy the Vex formation. Each ship moved with purpose, supporting the others in ways that looked almost telepathic. The Guardian, badly damaged, positioned itself to provide cover for the smaller ships. The Defiant moved through the enemy formation like a knife through paper. The Vex tried to adapt. Their Warmind AI began new attack patterns, but every strategy was built around exploiting human communication. Silent humans were outside its programming. Amy caught Jake's attention and pointed to her display. She had identified the Vex command ship, the one carrying the Warmind AI. She held up 2 fingers, then pointed to herself and then to the enemy ship. 2-person boarding action. Jake shook his head. Too dangerous. But Amy's expression was cold and determined. She pointed to Rodriguez, then to herself, then to the enemy ship again. She wasn't asking permission, she was stating what needed to be done. The Marine assault ship launched from the Defiant without fanfare. No battle cries, no music, no jokes. Just Rodriguez and Amy, moving toward the enemy command ship with deadly intent. The Vex defenders were completely unprepared. Their programming expected human chaos, Marines singing battle songs, commanders shouting orders, the constant chatter of human coordination. Instead, they faced soldiers who moved like ghosts. Rodriguez's Marines took control of the ship's outer sections in minutes. They moved through the corridors using hand signals, their weapons firing with mechanical precision. The Vex had prepared for human emotional warfare, not for humans who fought like machines. Amy made her way to the ship's central computer core, her usual cheerful personality replaced by cold determination. She worked at the computer terminals. In complete silence, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Back on the Defiant, Jake watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. The human fleet was winning, but the victory felt different. There was no celebration, no jokes, no sense of human triumph. Just the cold satisfaction of objectives achieved. The Vex Warmind AI made one final attempt to understand its enemy. It broadcast recordings of previous human battles, trying to trigger their normal response patterns. The communications channels, filled with the sounds of human laughter, battle songs, and casual conversation from past engagements. For a moment, Jake felt the pull of those familiar sounds. The desire to respond, to fall back into the comfortable chaos of human communication. But he resisted. His people needed him to be something else right now. The psychological warfare backfired completely. The broadcast sounds gave away the location of the Vex command ship's central processor. Amy, working in the computer core, used the transmission. As a targeting beacon, the Warmind AI's last thought was confusion. It had been designed to fight chaotic humans, not silent ones. As Amy's virus infected its systems, it tried to understand what had happened. The humans had become something it wasn't programmed to counter. The Vex fleet began to fall apart as their central coordination failed. Ships that had moved in perfect formation suddenly became isolated and vulnerable. The human fleet picked them off one by one, still maintaining their terrible silence. When the last Vex ship was destroyed, the human fleet regrouped in the empty space. They had won, but the victory felt hollow. The silence that had saved them now seemed to stretch on forever. Jake looked at his crew and saw something that troubled him. They had become efficient, deadly, and completely inhuman. Amy's bright personality was gone. Pete's constant chatter was replaced by mechanical reporting. Even Sarah's jokes had been replaced by cold professionalism. For several long minutes, the fleet maintained its silence. Ships moved in perfect formation, but there was no celebration, no human emotion. They had won by becoming something they weren't. Finally, Jake made a decision. He opened the communication channel and spoke 4 words that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. All clear. Resume normal operations. The transformation back was almost jarring. Amy's voice returned to its usual cheerful tone as she reported casualty figures. Rodriguez's Marines began talking and joking again as they returned from their boarding actions. The familiar chaos of human communications flooded the channels once more, but something had changed. The alien observers had seen what humans could become when they chose to be silent. And that knowledge would change everything. Commander Zexion began typing his report with shaking hands. The humans weren't just chaotic warriors. They were something much more dangerous, a species that could choose what they became in battle. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The return to normal human behavior should have been a relief, but Commander Zexion found himself more disturbed than ever. He watched Jake Morrison's crew fall back into their usual patterns, Amy making jokes about Vex computer systems, Pete commenting on the wreckage, Sarah humming while she worked on repairs, but something had changed. Zexion could see it in the way they moved, the way they looked at each other. They had accessed something deep within themselves, something that had been waiting there all along. Captain Morrison, Zexion said carefully, I must ask about what occurred during the silent period. How did your crew coordinate without any detectable communication? Jake looked at him with tired eyes. I'm not sure I can explain it in a way you'd understand, Commander. We just knew what to do. But this is impossible by known biological standards. Your species should not be capable of such coordination without technological assistance. Looked up from her station with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Commander, we've been fighting together for 3 years. Sometimes you don't need words to know what your friends are thinking. Zexion began typing his report, his hands shaking slightly. Human combat effectiveness increased by 340% during silent operations. Tactical coordination exceeded theoretical maximums for organic species. Recommend immediate analysis of human neural networks. On the Guardian, Lisa Brooks was dealing with her own concerns. Her crew had performed the same impossible coordination, but now they seemed almost uncomfortable with what they had done. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Gary Stone, kept looking at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Captain, Gary said quietly, when we went silent, I knew exactly what you wanted me to do. Not because of training or experience. I just knew. How is that possible? Lisa didn't have an answer. She had felt it too, the strange certainty that had replaced their usual chaotic coordination. It was as if they had all become parts of a single organism, working toward a common goal without need for words. Rodriguez's Marines were having similar experiences. The sergeant found his men unusually quiet as they cleaned their weapons and prepared their gear. Finally, Private Kevin Walsh spoke up. Sarge, when we boarded that Vex ship, I knew where every enemy was before I saw them. I knew what you wanted me to do before you signaled. That's not normal, right? Rodriguez looked at his men and saw the same confusion in all their faces. They had performed perfectly, but none of them understood how. I don't know, Walsh. I really don't know. The Vorthak Observer Resonance of Stars was compiling her own report. Her crystalline structure allowed her to perceive electromagnetic patterns that other species missed. What she had recorded during the human silence period would reshape galactic understanding of organic neural networks. Human coordination during silent period shows electromagnetic resonance patterns similar to hive mind species, she noted. But humans show no biological structures that should allow such coordination. This suggests unknown capabilities. The implications were staggering. If humans could coordinate like a hive mind without the biological structures that made such coordination possible, what else might they be capable of? Jake stood alone on the bridge, looking out at the wreckage of the Vex fleet. The victory felt hollow, not because they had lost people, but because of what they had become to achieve it. His crew was back to their normal behavior, but he could see the change in their eyes. "Captain," Amy said softly, approaching him, "what did we become out there?" "I don't know," Jake replied honestly, "but it felt like something we'd always been able to do. Like we were just remembering how." Amy nodded slowly. "That's what scares me. It didn't feel new. It felt doctoral. Unknown to the human fleet, their battle was being watched by observers, much more powerful than the Kaleri or Vorthak. Deep space monitoring stations, manned by species that rarely interfered in galactic affairs, had recorded everything, the Council's inner circle being so old and powerful that most species had forgotten they existed, began emergency sessions. Humanity had just demonstrated capabilities that challenged their understanding of organic evolution. "The humans have shown a secondary combat mode," reported the ancient being known only as the Watcher. "Their species may be more dangerous than we initially calculated." "How dangerous?" asked another council member, a creature of pure energy that had been observing galactic development for millennia. "Dangerous enough to rewrite our protocols for contact with emerging species. If humans can access hive-mind coordination without biological adaptation, they may represent a new form of evolution." Back on the Defiant, Jake received a priority message from Council headquarters. The seal was one he had never seen before. The mark of the deep space observers who watched from the shadows. "Captain Morrison, you are ordered to report to Council headquarters immediately. Come alone. Do not discuss this order with your crew or other personnel. Classification level, beyond secret." Jake stared at the message, feeling a chill run down his spine. In 3 years of service, he had never seen a classification level above top secret. What had they done that required such secrecy? Amy noticed his expression. "Captain, what's wrong?" "Nothing," Jake lied. "Just routine paperwork from headquarters." But Amy had been with him too long to be fooled. During the silent period, she had felt his thoughts as clearly as her own. That connection hadn't completely faded. She could sense his worry, his confusion, his fear. "Sir," she said quietly, "whatever this is about, we did what we had to do. We saved the fleet." Jake nodded, but he wasn't sure that was how the Council would see it. They had demonstrated capabilities that no human should possess. Capabilities that might make them a threat to the galactic order. The journey to Council headquarters took 2 days. Jake spent most of the time trying to understand what had happened during the battle. How had his crew coordinated so perfectly? Without speaking, how had they known what to do? The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and terrifying. They had stopped being individuals and become something else. A group mind that could think and act as one. But humans weren't supposed to be able to do that. When the transport ship arrived at Council headquarters, Jake was met by security forces he didn't recognize. They escorted him through corridors he had never seen, past chambers that seemed to exist outside normal space. Finally, he was brought to a room that defied description. The walls seemed to stretch into infinity, and the beings seated around the massive table were unlike anything in the known galaxy. These were the true power behind the Galactic Council, the ancient species that had been guiding galactic development for millions of years. "Captain Morrison," spoke a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You have demonstrated capabilities that require explanation." Jake stood at attention, feeling very small and very young. Sir, we did what was necessary to complete the mission. You did more than that. You accessed coordination abilities that should not exist in your species. Our observers recorded electromagnetic patterns that suggest hive mind capabilities. How is this possible? Jake honestly didn't know. Sir, I can't explain it. When we went silent, everything just fell into place. Like we remembered how to do something we'd always known. The beings exchanged looks that Jake couldn't interpret. Finally, the voice spoke again. Captain Morrison, your species has just demonstrated that they are potentially more dangerous than any force in the galaxy. What you did should be impossible. The fact that it felt natural to you is even more concerning. Sir, are we in trouble? Not trouble, Captain. But you are now a problem that requires careful management. The Council is implementing special protocol 7 Alpha regarding human military operations. When human forces enter silent mode, all allied forces will maintain maximum distance and await further instructions. Jake felt a chill run through him. Sir, what does that mean for humanity's place in the Council? It means, Captain Morrison, that the galaxy now knows that humans are capable of becoming something other than human. And that knowledge changes everything. The meeting continued for hours, with questions Jake couldn't answer and implications he couldn't fully grasp. When it was over, he was escorted back to his ship with orders he couldn't discuss and knowledge he couldn't share. But as he returned to the Defiant, Jake realized that the galaxy's fear of what humans might become was nothing compared to his own fear of what they had already become. The quiet period had shown them something about themselves that they weren't ready to understand. And there was no going back. Jake Morrison returned to the Defiant with orders he couldn't discuss and knowledge that felt too dangerous to share. The ship felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because he saw his crew differently. Amy's cheerful smile, Pete's constant chatter, Sarah's casual jokes, all of it seemed like a mask hiding something deeper. Captain, Amy said as he entered the bridge, how did the meeting go? Jake looked at her and felt a chill. During the silent period he had felt her thoughts as clearly as his own. That connection was still there, just below the surface. He could sense her curiosity, her concern, her growing awareness that something significant had happened. Routine debriefing, he said, the lie tasting bitter in his mouth. Amy's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew he was lying, but she also knew not to push. That understanding between them was part of what made them so effective.